Ora tātou, ngā mihi nui kia koutou katoa e whakarongo mai ana. I'm Brennan Rigby from the Shift Aotearoa, another one of our webinars in the housing space for VisionWeek here in New Zealand. And today we're just biting off a little boring subject called financialisation. I'm joking, of course, it's going to be heaps of fun. Today I've got with me Chris Glaudel, James Palmer and Paul Gilbert to talk about what is often seen as a bit of a global phenomenon, and maybe we don't quite know its the ways in which it's incrementing into New Zealand, but I'm sure that this group is going to be able to talk about what financialisation is and talk about its impact in New Zealand, and then hopefully by the end of this hour or so we'll be able to move into talking about how we might be able to mitigate its negative consequences and what our vision for the future is. So without further ado, thanks gentlemen for joining me this afternoon, really appreciate your time. And I'll just pass to you, Chris, to firstly introduce yourself and just give us some opening thoughts to try and start framing up what this thing financialisation is.
Kia ora koto. Chris Glaudel, Deputy Chief Executive with Community Housing Aotearoa. And financialisation is a term that's being applied to the change in the way people view real estate and view homes. And it used to be that a home was a place that you raised your family, that it was a place that you set down your roots, connected with neighbors, joined into local community activities. And over the past several decades, that traditional view of the home has changed into one, for many people, of a home as a financial product. And while many people always felt it important, the stability of the home in and of itself was an intrinsic social good, it has over time become seen as really an economic good, and more people relying upon it to fund their retirement, not as a rent-free place to live in which they know all their neighbors and everybody that's grown up around them, but as something to invest in and to earn a profit from and use that profit to improve their own economic situation without considering the impacts that that profit motive has on lower income households or others that don't enjoy the same benefits. And this has been exacerbated in recent decades by the growth of international asset funds and by the increasing facility of the flow of capital around the world, where somebody based in Hong Kong or in London or in San Francisco can invest in real estate in Auckland or Sydney or anywhere else that they view as a safe place that will realize a capital appreciation. And so I think, for me, that financialisation at its core is a change from a home as a place to raise a family and to set down roots into a financial product.
Pretty great summary. Thank you, Chris. I'll look forward to how the other gentlemen can build upon that, but great foundation. Thank you very much. James, what would you like to add to that? And please introduce yourself a little bit.
Yeah, thank you. So, hi, I'm James, and I'm the CEO of Community Finance. And obviously, hard act to follow going after what Chris has just said. Great summary. But, I think in simplistic terms, this is a sort of chance to also take it back to, what is the New Zealand that we want for our people? And, you'd think out of fairness, a warm, dry home that's also affordable is something that we would want for our people. And so, Chris has gone into those specific reasons and those are spot on. But the challenge is for so many people, and sadly the stats back it up, each year there's more of our people throughout Aotearoa where a warm, dry, affordable home is not something that they can have for themselves and or their family. And that's a really sad place to be in. The public housing waiting list is just something that's tragic for our country. And so, I think there's enough evidence now to show that the whole system has, in effect, become broken. We haven't had enough houses that are controlled by the state. There's some amazing community housing providers in New Zealand that are providing so much support to families, but we need more. And, the fact is that, since the 1980s, neoliberalism has been adopted, and we've had a situation where property price inflation continues to have been higher than wage inflation. And so for a lot of workers, and some of these are essential service workers too, you're talking about teachers and nurses. that are finding a fair renting in their home, particularly city. They're getting paid the same, whether it's, in a rural area with cheaper home prices and rents or in a city. If they've got a rent and they might have a couple of kids as well, it is very difficult to afford a 20% deposit. So we've built a financial system up that, like the whole system, has been actually designed around profits, and that's become so often the main focus. And that's true in the finance space as well, where, you see some of the largest profits in our country being by banks, and it's unsustainable. And so that's really, I think, what we're talking about today, isn't it? That we've got a system-wide problem, and there's a lot of bright, caring people out there around the country wanting to make a difference. And we need to, and we're about 20 years behind, so we need to start it now.
Right. Great, James. Great addition to Chris's foundation. I'm interested in the course of this conversation, and please remind me of this. I really like to unpack or build a clearer picture of this connection between this idea that generally our markets have financialized over the last half a century or whatever period of time you want to put on it, and the fact that that's having an impact, or the assertion that that's having an impact on families. But let's park that. But let's make sure we unpack that surface it a bit more. So kia ora. And Paul Gilbert, for anyone who's listening or watching this at any time, is currently on hands-free in a car, so he's going to stay off screen. But listen, Paul, if you're able, do you want to introduce yourself and add some more thoughts?
Yeah, kia ora. Paul Gilbert's my name, and I've come to this conversation by way of a circuitous route. I began from a sort of social justice perspective looking into this and working in and through the church networks, and then through a community housing lens, working with a community housing provider, and now through community finance. And so really important conversation that we're having. And it really, I think it starts with that word and that concept of home or papakainga or turanga waiwai, a place to stand. And we've seen that come to the fore recently with COVID, where your first line of defence, if you were lucky enough to have one, was your home, because you retreated to it. And I think what I've seen over the last sort of 10 or 15 years has outraged me, in the sense of people living in tents and cars and totally inappropriate dwellings as a result of increasingly unaffordable, insecure and unstable tenures. And that has impacts on health, on mental health, on well-being, on education, on educational outcomes. And those are, I think, the unintended but inevitable consequences of the financialisation of housing. And so that's really what we're fighting, and we're all in this together. And I think, if anything, COVID has helped us to realise that the connectedness of everything, and never more so than now, we see that through the commoditisation of housing and the impacts that has on our communities, and the realisation that if we're going to fix it, everybody needs to get involved and everybody needs to do their part and play their part.
Kia ora. Some wide-ranging observations from you also, Paul. Thanks you guys all for setting the scene so nicely on financialisation, and there's a lot for us to drill down on, which is what the role I'm going to try and play today. So I'm going to share with you a little picture which I think of when I think of kind of that theory of intervention logic between financialisation and the impact it has on houses, and it goes something like this. And I imagine a bunch of people at an auction. Maybe there's 20 people, but the auction starts at zero. It doesn't start at $800,000. It starts at zero. So until that auction gets up to $100, everybody's bidding. And then suddenly it gets up to, $10,000, and quite a few people have dropped out.
Caution. Approaching speed camera.
I'm not speeding. I'm sorry about that.
It was supposed to be caution approaching $100. You've lost the first 5 minutes. Yeah.
And so you get the picture. When the house price hits $300,000, you've still got quite a lot of families in the mix. You've still got quite a lot of essential workers in the mix. $500,000, $600,000. You know, you've got some of those families and some of those essential service workers who have maybe been saving for 10 years, or they've got some help from somewhere else, which is really common as well. And then over 600,000, and I'm just making up numbers, and you guys are better at that stuff than me. Not making up numbers, I mean knowing the real numbers. Then suddenly there's not so many families left in the mix, and the person who's buying the house is the one who's got the ability to buy the house. And so maybe that ends up being an investor, right? And they're taking housing out of our what you could refer to as our family housing stock. So I'm just going to pause there. Kia ora, Paul.
Kia ora.
So I've just created an abstract picture of what it looks like, but you know, Chris, how do you think we could draw that picture a little bit more clearly about the connection between financialisation and families?
Well, unfortunately, the picture is pretty stark when you look at homelessness and you look at the number of households that are paying, you know, more than 50% of their income toward rent and are making those hard choices every month about how much food do they buy this week. You know, when do they replace, you know, a pair of shoes for a child, or, you know, buy additional school materials or other things. So I think it's really looking at how do you change that narrative, and part of that is looking at you know, the overall financial system and the rules under which we play. New Zealand has made a choice not to tax capital gains. Successive governments have backed away from that, and what we see when those home buyers, those families that we look at that are out there saving for a deposit, using their KiwiSaver, which was supposed to be meant for the retirement, to buy current consumption goods in housing, competing against somebody who has some wealth and has some cash to invest and is willing to take that return rather than needing a place to live as their competition. It makes it very difficult for them. The Reserve Bank put in place some LVR restrictions and increased the amount of capital that was required until just recently, and they relaxed those during COVID. So I think that was potentially a lever that was working to help those first home buyers, and we did see increases in the number of first home buyers with that action from the Reserve Bank, and now we're watching to see what happens now that it's been relaxed. And so I think part of it is looking at the sources of capital. And yes, we need investors. We need people to provide rental housing. Not everyone at all stages of their life and all stages of their careers is going to want to purchase a home. But we need to make sure that when they are ready, that there is something that's affordable for somebody who's on an average wage. And in too many of our communities, it's not only out of reach, it's well out of reach. And that needs to change. And I think some of the things that could help that is really developing a view of housing, not just as a commodity, but as a social good, and providing incentives for long-term hold and long-term rentals with a reasonable rate of return. And we've seen socially motivated investors or others, you know, we've seen, say in the US where I worked, a large pension fund, AFL-CIO, that was making direct long-term mortgage lending available to charitable organizations around housing and giving 30-year mortgages at 4 or 5%. They were happy to match their long-term pension needs and returns at a reasonable rate to provide below market capital to long-term rental housing owned by not-for-profits. And I think New Zealand needs to develop that. Right now, as was mentioned, I think by James earlier, about the bank profits. While interest rates are low, there's still, could be lower, and there's still that money that's going offshore and off seas. And I think if we look at, say, ACC and New Zealand Super, you know, how can they deploy some of the capital that they have available and the long-term horizon that they have and the long-term obligations with the long-term nature of homes, and particularly of rental homes? And how do we marry those better together with not-for-profit long-term ownership that is focused on the quality of the home and the quality of the experience for the resident, rather than a capital gain at a future point in time and ratcheting up the rent at every opportunity when the market moves a little bit. So I think those are some of the things that I see as ways forward.
Got Chris. Thanks for that. So at risk of just doing a roundtable between you all following the same sequence, but listen, we'll just carry on. So James, a couple of things there. I think there's a great point that we do need to expand on, which is, we need finance in the housing system, right? So how do we talk about financialisation in a way that makes sure that people know that we understand the need for finance as well?
Yeah, well, I think it's and again, hopefully out of COVID-19, not just in New Zealand, but across the world, there is that little chance to pause and reflect on our society and the commoditization of almost everything, not just finance, right? So, it has so often been that the world that we have adopted and live in is about purely capitalism and profit. And I guess we're seeing the fruits of that, and it smells a little bit, that fruit, after decades of doing it. So, when you look at housing, surely there is a majority that you would think would say, yeah, we want something that's warm, dry, and affordable. Whether that's something that's just a long-term rental option for a family, so that they don't have to choose between the new shoes, Chris was saying, or that a warm, dry home is accessible to own for a couple that actually earn a normal wage in the country. On the finance side, I think it's no different. It has been set up where actually a lot of these banks, their focus is profit. That's their role for shareholders. And, I don't think we need to also berate them. That was their purpose, and they're achieving their purpose very, very efficiently each year. And so, moving forward, there needs to be, I think, one where it is people, it is profit, and it's planet. There has to be a little bit of let's look at long-term as well for society. And it also needs to be a partnership between the state and the private sector. I think surely there's enough evidence now where we say the private market will solve everything. Well, it hasn't. You can look at the stats, but also there is so much to fix that I think it's unfair of us to assume the government can fix it all. So for our view, putting on my community finance hat, we set that up very deliberately on the basis, there is a lot of groups with land that want to be philanthropic. There are community housing providers that provide these enormous, extraordinary services. I mean, I've just absolutely fallen for what these wraparound services are provided by so many community housing providers. I mean, imagine giving budgeting advice, having someone living on site to support families. What a great way to operate, and it works. But then if they then have to go to a bank, it's then a partnership with one party being there predominantly just for profit. So again, the whole thing becomes commoditized. So if we can take something like finance and have a partner that's saying, let's do it at a lower margin, let's do, lending with a social purpose, and with one of the key elements being that, let's go to philanthropists and community foundations and actually aim for, like you say, ACC and the super fund. But why don't all of us say, actually, we've got enough capital to fix this? But instead of just chasing the highest returns possible, what if we're getting a fair return and supporting NZ Inc. by actually building more community housing? So it's the whole system. I mean, there are developers quite rightly doing this for profit. So what do they build on a section? Well, they've had to spend so much at that auction that started at zero. By the time they've done it, they build a 5-bedroom home on it, and they put in the marble, kitchens, top. They do all these things because they're trying to make it work. It's their job. So the system's out of whack. Housing has become a commodity, and we've got an increasing number of people in our country now that are locked out of it. And so there isn't one magic bullet from what I can see. It actually has to be a concerted effort, a long-term plan. And I think that's what I think is so exciting about VisionWeek as well. Instead of saying, let's fix this in 2, 3, or 5 years, it's going to take 10, 20 years to actually turn this around. But you have to start today by saying, well, what if we earn that little bit less here? So what if a church group put some land in at a little bit less? What if we became the finance partner and we earn less? What if some of these construction parties come in here? That's when we start getting the fruits of actually putting people first, not just profit.
Amazing. Thanks, James. Great insights into your experiences in the space. And Paul, I know that you've, let's just say I know you've managed a fair bit of investment into developing housing. And I wonder, just in your mind, and listen, I'll give you an and answer any of the questions that have come up for you with Chris or James. but also feel free to answer, how in your mind, so let me make an assertion. So financial investment in housing with good human outcomes and good social outcomes is possible, right?
Absolutely. I think I would like to come in with a message of hope, having seen some examples emerging over the recent days and months that are green shoots of a new way of doing things. And I think it's important if we look back over recent history and back to some of the points that James made, I think it's really important for people to understand the difference between finance and funding, because it often gets very confused when we use different terms in this market. And for people who aren't familiar with turning a piece of land into a community by building homes, it's really important that they understand the distinction between these things, because the system has been quite broken for quite some time for the people that are playing in what's not the market, i.e. Community housing providers, churches, charities, who struggle when they go to the normal high street banks to get what's called finance, construction finance, which is the sort of money that you use when you're taking a piece of land and turning it into a finished home. And the reason the banks typically don't want to do that kind of lending is because of the risk, the reputational risk of calling that loan in. And so we've had a big blockage there in terms of the provision of construction finance, which is one of the things that we're trying to address at Community Finance, and others are doing it as well. And that's different from the funding that might come in from a government agency to pay for the rent or the occupancy of that dwelling once it exists. And so I like to describe what we're doing at Community Finance as like a village wine press or a communal asset, where lots of really good organisations like James has alluded to, and Chris also, community housing providers, Hapu, iwi, community groups, church groups, may have some resources, may have some land, may have some money, and want to do a good job. So I think of them as the growers, growing their grapes and wanting to make some wine. But not everybody needs to have a financial intermediary like Community Finance, which is like the wine press, to help efficiently and cost effectively turn that grape and grape juice into wine. And so really what we're trying to do is reduce margins, profit margins at every point in the value chain to deliver a more affordable home at the end. And that includes, as James said, maybe putting the land in at a subsidised level or deferring the payment for the land, working with values-aligned developers and civil engineers, working with values-aligned builders who are prepared to cut their profit margin because they believe in delivering community outcomes. And I think that's back to this concept of sort of, in Māori, he waka eke noa, a canoe that we're all in together. By working in that new way, I think anything is possible. And we're seeing those projects emerge around the country at the moment. So I'm very hopeful.
Awesome. That's great. Thank you once again, Paul. So listen, I'm having a bit of tension here. So we're talking about financialisation, and there's been a couple of observations about the market. And, it seems like the market and financialisation are probably pretty intrinsically linked. I've got two questions. Are they? But I guess the second question is, what should we expect from a housing market? And what shouldn't we expect from a housing market? I'll just go back to you, James. I'm conscious that you've got to take off in about 12 minutes, and then we'll open it up.
Yeah, look, and those are deep philosophical questions, aren't they? I mean, some here, there's that balancing, isn't there, between there are, and again, you don't want this to be the beat up of banks or developers who are also achieving and helping create some great outcomes. It's getting a balancing act, which I think we all go back to, which is, and I think United Nations have taken some great steps here about leading this, is this a human right issue or not? And I thought that was a revelation, thinking of it in those terms. Is someone born in our country, being born into a country where it is their right for them to have a warm, dry home that's affordable? And if the answer to that is yes, then we have to make the market work for that. And that's where the market actually is all of us. It's our behaviours, it's our values, it's profit. But, the biggest player in this is still the government in the market too. And so, I think that the key to this is having those long-term plans, because then, as Paul was saying, you can have hope. And if you put into that formula time, you actually can build some solid long-term, positive outcomes. And then hopefully there is that collaboration that comes in, so you've got in the community housing space already those incredible outcomes, thousands and thousands of people housed. So what if we start having, the government, community housing, iwi, churches, all of us collaborating with some common goals that we might have to work hard on, but are achievable over the next decade or so. I think we can actually turn that around, because I don't think there's a big push for there to not be profits in housing, and nor should there be. That's people's livelihoods. But it can't be surely on the trajectory we've been in, where there's so many left behind. And when those people being left behind keeps growing each year, it's wrong. And, I was blown away, being taught by people in, CHA, so Community Housing Aotearoa, and Paul early on about there's this thing called a housing continuum. And it's interesting, it's something you intrinsically know as a human. You get to drive around and you see the tragedy of someone who's homeless. You'll see a state home, you'll then see a palace, and you can see there's a spectrum. But it was really interesting having it put in terms of, on one side you've got a homeless issue, you've then got emergency transitional housing, social housing. You then might have progressive home ownership, and then you've got this giant thing called the marketplace. Well, over many years in New Zealand, we've been shifting so much money to a really tragic area, which has been homelessness, and we've seen some fruits of that. But we haven't created a pipeline to actually take someone that's now been housed and give them the tools and the ability to stay in that home, build a community, and maybe then rent it for decades to come. But there's certainly been very little for them to be able to then buy it and have it as something that's there. So one of the projects we're working on, we're wanting to see families that are living in tents going into a home. They'll be able to get funding for that, but we want to transition them in time, give them the tools, and if they wish to, allow them to buy that house, and that might take 10 or 12 years. But how exciting is that if someone can start seeing that house they're in as being a place they can stay at, and something they can, eventually own. And you're going to look after it if that's the case. And, I've just been blown away by how many people I've seen where, they go from house to house to house, kids from school to school to school. And is it any surprise then that those kids often will have learning difficulties or issues trying to make friends when they've been at 10 schools? So, I think it's a combination of us collaborating, being bold, taking a long-term step, and actually intervening. And that intervention, as I think we're all saying, is not just on the finance front, but it has to be one of them. It just can't just be about profit. So we're ready to go. And I think the government's starting to make some really exciting moves in housing as well. And obviously, I think we can do more. But if we do that together now, we're going to start seeing some really positive outcomes. But it's going to take years, because for 30 years, we have not done a good job on housing here. Yeah. And the state stopped investing properly in housing. So there is a lot of work to do.
Lots to do. Kia ora, James. Amazing. Just put me in mind of a quote from Leilani Faha, actually, where she was commenting on her movie, The Shift, in a Q&A, and she said, well, it's not that I don't think that there's a place for capitalism. There probably is. But capitalism run amok, I have a problem with.
Yeah, absolutely. And she's spot on there. I mean, we were so lucky having her here in Aotearoa, and as I said, for me, it was a sort of light bulb moment, because I think as a values point of view, you'd often think of that as a human rights issue, but it was very wise of her saying, this is a human rights issue. And that's hopefully something whereas, in the community housing sector, but also the government does actually take seriously now too, because we need to actually draw a line in the sand. There is so much evidence that backs this up. It is inexcusable now not to take action. It's just not supported.
And it's good to recall that governments around the world are always so clear and determined in responding to United Nations direction. Okay. Do you know the one thing I haven't convened this week, James, and I wish I had, was a session on housing as a human right.
Yeah. Well, I think it was spot on that it's a starting point, but I mean, I'm a lawyer by background. That's why, I'm now giving back in this role. But, the interesting thing is that there's actually supposed to be something quite precious about laws. When you go back in history, they've often, been about righting wrongs. And that's the bit I'm passionate about. So we need to say that is a right. But as with anything, the proof is actually in the delivery and the action, isn't it? It's actually easy to say something. And that's why there's actually an enormous task in front of us, because it's not enough just to set targets now. All of us have to really roll up our sleeves.
Kia ora. So James, thanks very much. Just in case you don't get a chance to chime in again, kia ora, thanks for joining us. And we'll talk again sometime. What's that?
I'll look forward to it. Thank you.
Ka pai. Thanks, James. But please don't go if you really don't need to.
No, I've got a few more minutes, so that'd be great.
So Chris, listen, you can also reflect on anything in the conversation, so be interested in your thoughts.
Yeah, and again, I agree with James that markets are very efficient at what they do, and that's great when you're designing the next laser printer, the next car to be more fuel efficient. It's a little different when you're dealing with where people live and where they need safety and security and a place to grow up and a place to raise their families. And I think what markets don't do are impose values. And I think that's where society has to step in, and through governments and through civil society, to impose our social norms and to impose laws, regulations, expectations around people's behaviors. And I think for too long, we've ignored that leavening function of rules and regulations in ensuring that people have this access to a basic right of a home. And why is it that we're comfortable at the high rate of respiratory infections amongst mainly Pacific and Maori families due to poor housing conditions? That's a value choice that we've made, that people's ability to earn money off of housing is more important than the lives of children. And I think fundamentally we need to reassert the value of human life, the value of families and society, and to embed those not within the amorphous market, but in the rules, regulations, and the incentives that we put in place. And I think James had mentioned, we failed to invest for a long time, and there's some great research out of the Building Better Homes, Towns, and Cities National Science Challenge that shows the level of government investment previously, direct capital investment, and how that dropped off about 30 years ago. And funny enough, the housing that was produced since then has increasingly gone up into the upper reaches, into those McMansions and palaces that we see sprouting up in places, and fewer modest homes that average working people can afford. And so I think we need to reimpose both some regulations and increase the quality and the sustainability of the homes that we build to make sure that they're efficient to run and have the least impact on the environment as we can design in, and to make that a continuous improvement process rather than a point in time that we might look again at building code in 10 or 15 years. And provide some incentives for that. And then also look at what are the ways that we can incentivize and work with the market to deliver the types of homes that we need at the price points that people need. It's been interesting, it's phenomena seen in other Western countries, that as household sizes have steadily decreased, home sizes have steadily increased. In New Zealand, I think, is currently third in the world, up there with the US and Australia in the average size of a new home. And I've talked to builders about this. We've done housing research and looked at demographic trends and the clear changing household demographics to more single and couple-only households at the same time that we're cranking out 4 and 5 bedroom homes like there's no tomorrow. And the reason for it, as James had talked about, is once you put so much into the land and do these other things, developers and builders are responding to a portion of the market that is able to pay highest and best price for a commodity. And they're building a commodity and not a home. And I think we need to to look at what are those incentives to deliver homes that are matched to both the incomes and the household sizes of our communities. And that also means that we're building things that respond not just to the traditional European assumed families, but to the multicultural families that are actually here and have different housing needs and different aspirations and respond in a way that's culturally appropriate. And I think we haven't done nearly enough. And in fact, we put up significant barriers for iwi and Maori to realize their housing aspirations. And I've talked to government officials since I started working in this field for 8 years, and they've all recognized it. And it goes back, several decades, and yet nothing is happening. And I don't understand how we can all say, yes, there's a significant problem for iwi and Maori to build homes on their own land, to build papakāinga, and yet we're not doing anything to address it.
Yeah, and what a wonderful opportunity, Chris, to do something about it now, right? Because at the frontline response to a public health issue through COVID, one of the things that the magic moments of the community housing sector was addressing homelessness at an unprecedented level. My understanding is that up to 6,000 people were housed temporarily in motel units to keep them safe from COVID. And now, oh my goodness, what's the permanent solution going to be for those people, right? Because they can't live forever in a motel. And so we've got a wonderful and unique opportunity with a reset as part of this visioning of a better future to rethink and redirect back to our North Star of providing the type of house in the right location with the right tenure to meet that demand or that need in each unique context and unique place, whether that be a cultural context or a geographic location. So it's a wonderful opportunity that, and I don't know who said it, but let's not waste a crisis. There's a really good opportunity to do things better together out of this.
Oh, kia ora, Paul, for those comments, and Chris. So, listen, we've got some problems here, right? We've got financialisation, and we've got a market that seems to deliver more readily for the, let's say, flasher homes, more expensive homes. Seems like they're just kind of doing what the market allows them to do, though. So, the question that I'm left with, just for the moment, I've got 8 minutes, we'll manage it fairly carefully, is it possible to put a regulatory regime in place that's going to help us reduce the negative impacts of financialisation? James,
yes.
Do you want to have another quick crack at that? I see you're still here.
I've delayed my other one. I'm enjoying being with you all. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because one of the big pushbacks you hear so often in market commentary is there's too much regulation, there's too much tape, so...
Totally.
Yeah, it is a tricky one, that, because there are times regulation's so critical, and there are times it can be a barrier and adds costs. And as with everything, that balancing act is a very fine one. And it's probably how capable the people would be who would write that and who would manage it. I think it's probably a bit of a cop out, but one of the easier answers, I think, is also just the state being a major player in the space. That's something that can actually make it far more fair for people. I think it was about 1992 when we saw that real drop-off Chris was talking about in the basically per capita spending on community housing. So perfect storm, so basically when house prices started to leap forward, that's when the government goes, let's invest less into creating those affordable houses. So quite a scary double act. And so we're seeing now that increase. And so hopefully that is one of the main ones there. But, when land prices what they are, it's hard, isn't it? Because if you're a developer, and let's say you're a smaller one, would you on your own choose, because of a value system you hold yourself, to make $100,000 less profit, say, and build something that would help people that would be locked out versus that 5 or 6 bedroom one? It's a really tricky one, that, isn't it? And I don't know how you'd regulate that. So it seems to be, from a stats point of view, we haven't had enough social houses. We haven't had, as Chris was talking about, that ability to have long-term tenures if you're renting. And that's something I think the government has to be stepping up into on the regulation side and building side. And then it's for me, supporting the community housing providers. I mean, that's what Paul and I are passionate about, and we want to come in on the finance side to help more of that happen. But it's quite exciting actually giving someone the tools to be able to own their own home in time. But isn't it a sad thing that, again, one of the projects we're looking at, it's where a philanthropic foundation will come in and own 30% of that house at, say, 0% so that they can afford it. So again, that's saying the market's broken, isn't it? Because we can't keep having that because we'll run out of philanthropic capital.
Yeah.
So look, tricky. So I think there is a place for regulation, but there's probably areas where we've got too much too. But I think we certainly need the government to take that long-term view, to partner with community housing providers and to have not just the funding, but also the finance side. So, imagine if they're coming in and using their lower cost of funds to start getting into the financing side. Well, what happens then is you've cut out the profit from the banks. And that's fair enough, actually. Sorry, roundabout answer, but not an easy one.
Not at all. So listen, we're pretty much drawn toward the end of our hui here, and I haven't had nearly enough time with any of you. Here's what we're going to do in the next 4 minutes. If you're now committed, James, to staying with us. Okay, I'm sorry. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do like the little wrap for the webinar for our audience so that they know what we've been talking about. That's going to give you all about 60 seconds to prepare your own 45-second pitch for the one change that we're going to put into VisionWeek and beyond. VisionWeek and beyond. Okay, so now I'm going to do my little wrap and then I'll come back to you guys. So kia ora, listeners. Hopefully someone out there has listened to our amazing kōrero on financialisation this afternoon with Chris Glaudel, James Palmer and Paul Gilbert. I've had a great time and thank you guys all for joining us. So we've been talking about financialisation today, which is something that's a little spooky. It's pretty big. It's a macro issue, that's for sure. But it's one that seems to have some pretty clear links to bad family outcomes and not great family outcomes. And as James pointed out, there's a really important link here to human rights, which is, do you know what, if we enshrined the human right to housing in New Zealand, that would actually probably require that we did something to mitigate financialisation. So let's hopefully that's a teaser for you or to go back and listen to the webinar again. But at any rate, what I've challenged these three guests today to do is come back to me with a 45-second pitch for the one change that they'd like to make, like to see made. And let's be fair. Let's say a change in the next 5 years that you think would be really meaningful. And just because he's the guy who's under the most time pressure, I'm going to go back to James. I know you're all bored of him, but hopefully he'll wow you with this opportunity.
I'm going to come with something new then. Well, look, should I try and keep to topic because we're talking about financialisation? There'd be a lot. Because I want a lot of change. But for me, what I'd love to see now is that partnership side. So us all really coming together with that view to the future, knowing we need to change it, which is evidence-based and it's supported. So I'd love to see the government coming in and working with us in financing some of these new projects as well. I know there's been a lot of money spent recently, but let's actually bring in the players that have the values that can take a long-term view. Because that's what it's actually going to take to fix housing for so many of these families. So I'd love to see a real growth in New Zealand of positive impact investment, where we as a country, KiwiSaver providers, they don't just do negative screening, and say, look, we're not investing in landmines now, they never should have. Let's actually invest in positive community housing. And if we do that, we'll build more. People will access lower cost finance. They'll be incentivized to do it, and we'll build houses for the people that need it.
Awesome. Thank you very much, James, for that wrap. And I'll go to you, Chris. What's your 45-minute pitch? Sorry, not 45 minutes, 45 seconds.
I'm going to have another drink.
With 45 minutes, I'd only need another 15 minutes to cover it all. But as a starting point, I think, James is spot on. We need to look at some of the investment incentives and things in there that government can do, that only government can do, which is to set some of the broader system settings. And we've made some choices over the past decades not to directly invest in development and ownership, in community ownership or ownership in iwi and Maori with a long-term perspective. We need to change that. We need to look at the accommodation supplement. Why are we spending $1.4 billion a year to subsidize rents and still having most of those households paying well in excess of 30% and many of them well in excess of 50% of their income on rents. That's a failed scheme. We need to look at how do we take that level of investment, and if we put it into permanently affordable homes with not-for-profit organizations and iwi Maori entities, what does that give us over the long run, and what's a better use of our money? We need to look at our land use. Many of the reasons that the developers are building those big houses is because the section sizes are set too large and don't provide the flexibility to deliver the types of and the typology of homes that match the current reality of New Zealand rather than the 140 or 50 years ago. So a number of things that have to happen in those areas. And I think we need to have that conversation around housing as a human right. And do we feel that it's acceptable that people are homeless or not? And if they're not, then we need to do something about it. And together we can come up with those solutions as a society. And I think until we're united around that fundamental question, it's always going to be a fight as to how to resolve these problems.
Amazing. Thanks, Chris. I just want to reflect on one thing, and I know you might be under a bit of time pressure too now, Paul, but this idea that that the government holds kind of the bunch of tools that we want to be implemented, but at the same time we're talking about a bit of a paradigm shift which needs to happen outside of government as well, right? Some societal change and some democratization and some good stuff like that. So thanks for flagging into some of that. We'll all have to get together again real soon, I think. So Paul, finally to you, my friend, 45-second pitch on this subject. What is the one change that you would like to see that would be really meaningful in the next 5 years, preferably one that might impact financialisation?
Yeah, it's nice and simple. I've become a huge fan of Kate Raworth and Donut Economics. I've got the book sitting on my desk, and I would like to see our government take a big leaf or quite a lot of leaves out of that book and transform itself into a donut government. And what that would look like in relation to financialisation, there you go. What that would look like would, funnily enough, represent an intergenerational kaitiakitanga sort of approach to finance in the housing space. Nobody can borrow money cheaper than they can. If they just did one thing and shared that access to that money at that low cost of capital with, for example, the community housing sector, it would be utterly transformational. And that's a real vision of a better future, just by being able to sit in the role of enabler and financier rather than owner, controller, deliverer. Overnight, everything changes. So that's my vision of a better future in terms of finance and housing and homes and communities for Aotearoa.
Amazing, amazing. Kia ora, Paul. Kia ora, James, and kia ora, Chris. Thank you so much for your time. You're all still here. And look, I'm not going to close this kōrero. Do you need to go?
I do.
Okay, all right. I just thought I'd try, right?
I'd love to stay talking about it because it's exciting. I mean, isn't it equal parts just tragic when you look at it all and you actually see a family living with no running water in a tent in our country versus the hope that actually with not that many tweaks, just a bit of courage and a bit of vision about something in the long run, we could turn it around.
Yep.
It is solvable.
It is.
It is solvable.
It's solvable.
We created this problem, we can fix it.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well,
thank you.
Okay. I'm going to do a little wrap for the webinar, and you guys can jump off if you want. And if you want to stay on and have a debrief, that's fine. Otherwise, ka kite. Thanks for joining me. Really appreciate it. Well, kia ora, everyone. This has been a talk on financialisation with James Palmer and Paul Gilbert and Chris Glaudel. And they've all gone, and that's okay because we managed to get through that kōrero okay. Thank you so much for listening. If you want to follow the Shift Aotearoa, we're on Twitter, Shift Aotearoa. Our website is theshiftaotearoa.wordpress.com. All of our Vision Week content is on the VisionWeek page on our website. So please feel free to have a look. And other than that, in about 16 hours, we're going to have another great session, this time on the call for a national housing strategy. And that is a derivative of something even more chunky, I think, which is actually the call for a national rights-based housing strategy, which feeds nicely from our conversation on financialisation today and on the housing systems conversation that was uploaded onto our website this morning. So kia ora for listening, and have fun out there.